Well, let me welcome you all, and we're absolutely delighted to have you here. So I'll give you a little bit of a history. I approached the Arup Foundation, and with the idea that we were concerned about our capacity as engineers to innovate, and therefore we wanted to continue this think tanks, but now focus in a much broader sense in engineering, and we wanted the first think tank to be centered around innovation. The conclusion of the group was that big question of how do you educate people that are capable of innovating, and so that's what brought us to where we are today. The format of the workshop is completely open. It's up to you to decide how you want to drive this discussion. So I'll leave it there, and I don't know if anybody has any comments or any questions, and we can get started from there.
The idea that engineering as part of a social contract of society has a responsibility to promote professional equity. Engineering is not the only profession that has exhibited the capacity to do that. I thought when you were talking about it, particularly of the nursing profession, you actually think in particular that engineering does have such a social responsibility.
No, I mean, again, I've come back to where I started this meeting yesterday morning. I mean, of the different frames of interpretation you could choose for why a profession exists, it seems that equity would be one of the very best. If not, I mean, so yeah, I very much believe that. And I think we are inheritors of a tradition of that. I think we are inheritors of curricula that at one point maybe had a lot more to say to that.
I would probably say there's no argument. I cannot see the point of being an engineer that isn't working for society.
Right. Sort of society has no expectation of engineers. I mean, you know, when we talk about sort of medicine and law are kind of these things that we're holding up as, right, professions. And there is a set of social expectations, right? Society expects doctors to behave in particular ways. We expect lawyers to behave in particular ways, and we mock those who don't, right? We do not, and certainly not in the U.S., have any kind of set of social expectations of engineers other than, you know, got me one of these things now, guess some engineer made that, and isn't that nifty? And
is engineering a profession like a doctor or lawyer, where your first allegiance is to the profession, and a set of ethics or something that distinguishes the profession from simply having a job as an engineer? In law, it is to the concept of justice. In medicine, it's an ethic of care. And it's basically human welfare is what most of the engineering ethical codes, if I'm remembering, claim.
Coming back to education, thinking about what my students, but I have these kind of discussions with them. Well, why are you coming in? Why do you want to do engineering? What is the point of all of this? And, many of the ones that I speak with are deeply motivated. They're certainly motivated to make a good living, but they're deeply motivated to solve, I think, the problems of the systems that they've inherited. Climate change, environmental remediation, and, access to clean water, access to communications, digital divide. These are the things that, largely unprompted, they will generate to a degree. And that's one of the questions I asked about innovation is, does it ask fundamental questions about society? Mm-hmm. Or is it always sort of accepting, well, these are the constraints that are laid down, and we're not going to really question those constraints because we've already got so many sunk costs into this technology, we're just going to keep it moving.
We were throwing around the wild idea of kind of like a mentorship education. Mm-hmm. I've seen various models like this where, so for example, I really want to learn about what you're talking about. You become my teacher. You advise me that maybe there's a great course here or a great course here, or maybe I should read these books. So it is a sort of self-directed education program. What would it take? A group of academics from around the world to decide to create a multiversity.
It's a uberversity.
Uberversity.
sort of Uber University thing. So it seems to me that's quite an interesting idea. The more I think about it, it's quite an interesting concept because it is completely and utterly dynamic. And the benefit of an Uber taxi network isn't the taxi, it's the network. And you can, in effect, you can pick your pieces of your different sort. You can choose. That sort of flexibility has completely transformed that piece of the transport market. And thinking about it over the last day or so, I sort of think, well, actually, maybe we should just get rid of all buildings and stuff, and have that sense that you can construct the piece of education that you want.
The value of education is not to produce the same graduates of a level of quality, but the aggregate of graduates who in some have a set of skills needed going forward, but have enough difference in their skills that some are going to thrive in this unpredictable future because they have some agency in their own pathway to education rather than being forced into this particular set of outcomes. And I think at some level that's the model that you're proposing, to say understand the world, understand how you want to change the world, and from that select a set of competencies, if you will, that will allow you to do this. And so now we have the idea of a university rather than a physical infrastructure and space and buildings as a university of a network, a connection of NGOs and companies and people who are centered around this idea of human development. And it may involve a physical space, but it's not the university quadrangle and the library and the administration building that is
that could be a bit of it, but it's part of, to me, it's the university of the mind. Maybe that's what we should have.
So the essence of what you're saying is that we are advocating to completely change the focus from the institutions and the industries those institutions serve into the actual individuals.
So it's the person that's accredited, not the institution.
Yes.
As much as we like to think often in higher ed that we're building these very permanent structures and permanent curricula, the world outside gates imposes itself on us in ways that at times have been highly generative of new concepts and new forms. And I think, just listening to my students, we are in one of those moments now. We are in a moment where people talk about crisis and nobody says, oh, you're over the top. I mean, sort of constant global warfare, climate change, sustainability, the decay and collapse of infrastructures, fundamentally engineering-oriented problems with engineering-oriented solutions. This is that moment. We are living in a crisis moment. And I think it's important that we own it. I like the ecosystem analogy, and sometimes the ecosystem gets out of balance, but that can be generative of new forms if we survive.